PDX Real, community engaged reporting, authentic and unapologetic. We tell you what the news isn't reporting and the politicians don't want you to know. Perhaps you've already noticed that our governing needs your attention. Join the conversation. Find us in both long and short format at these channels. Hello, Portland. I'm Angela. I'm from PDX Real. I'm here today with Kevin Dahlgren. I would love to introduce you to Kevin and talk about who he is and what he's doing. Kevin, you can find on Twitter, Kevin V. Dahlgren, and you can also find him on YouTube. What's your YouTube?
Truth on the Streets.
11,000 people on YouTube in 2 weeks, and been growing his Twitter following for about a year now. We feel like we're sort of sisters and brother in crime, right?
Yeah.
Just sort of, really just exposing what's going on in Portland and why. Kevin he does something really interesting. He's been a drug and alcohol counselor for 25 years.
Yep.
And he interviews people on the streets and talks to them straight from their mouth.
Yep.
Mouths of babes.
And I started doing this because for the longest time I've been very vocal on this dysfunctional system and nobody listened. And so I had the idea is if they're not going to listen to me, maybe they'll listen to the homeless because the homeless know what's going on, and you've seen this firsthand.
Yeah.
Oftentimes they seem to understand more about what's actually going on than the people in charge. And so I started doing these interviews, and that really blew up, and I've now interviewed hundreds in Portland alone, but throughout the West Coast of the United States, several hundred, and they're powerful. These are brutally honest, authentic interviews coming straight from them. And it's been amazing because I think that's helped kind of move the needle a little bit once people realized that this is how the homeless think. Because you can't solve a problem until you understand the problem, and I knew this going in. And also the fact is there's virtually no outreach out there, so someone had to go out there and do this.
Yeah. Tell me we're going to talk about how there's no outreach out there. That was really a strong thing to say, and it's very true in my experience too. Let's talk a little bit about how you came to be in this business.
Okay. Well, let's jump back 29 years or so. Is my little brother ended up on the streets of Portland, Oregon with a meth addiction. We shared the same bedroom, had the same parents, had the same opportunities. And the question is, how did I end up going to college while he was on the streets? We had the same exact opportunities. And it took me a long time to realize that because he was 11 months younger than me, he was just slightly less developed. And I think how we were raised affected him more than me, because we kind of grew up in a very low-income family where there was definitely some addiction issues. And for me, I was very resilient and just stayed away from it, but he was more susceptible to it and unfortunately ended up on the streets. Now, if I had known he went to the streets, I would have tried to have saved him, but he was embarrassed, so he told nobody and disappeared for several months. And then one day out of the blue, he called me and says, "Kevin, I'm on the streets." And I was like, "What?" And he says, "I'm on meth." And I'm like, "Meth?" And I really wasn't even sure what meth was, to be honest. I was in my early 20s.
Yeah.
And interesting side note is at the time I was kind of angry with my brother because he had stolen from me. And I learned later as he did this to supply his habits, which is very common with an addict. They're going to lie, cheat, and steal to the people closest to him to get their fix. And so I didn't know he was on the streets, but I was okay with him disappeared because I was mad, right? But when he called me, all that anger disappeared, and I was like, oh my God, my little brother's on the streets. And so I invited him into my home that day. And that day he moved into my small studio apartment on 16th and Hawthorne and stayed with me for about 6 months and eventually got into Oxford housing. Jump ahead now 29 years, as his date of sobriety was the day he moved into my apartment, is never used since. He now has a kid, he is thriving, has a house, and has a great job. And that's why I'm a big believer in reconnecting people on the streets with their family, because family in many ways is everything. And that's very important. And so I feel like I'm lucky that he had enough family support. But not everyone has it like that.
And it seems like whenever I'm talking with people, and Kevin, you talk with a lot more people than I do on the street, but when I talk with them, I'm finding that there is a lot of people, yes, that have trauma. I mean, I hear that just whenever I start asking about their story, but a lot of them come out of lack of family. Like they were in the foster care system, or we had just done an interview with Michael a few days ago together on Memorial Day, and he was adopted, and he was out on his own by the time he was 16.
And that is a good point, because the fact is, sometimes there is no family, or maybe it was the family that they're escaping. So again, it's not always about the family, but for a family that's just angry or upset, you got to build those bridges.
Yeah, totally.
But this is why it's so difficult to get people off the streets with that don't have a family, because guess who they think of as family is the people on the streets. And imagine it's no different than asking us to be like, oh, by the way, you need to, leave the people you talk with and love every single day and go into an isolated room by yourself. It's very difficult to get people off the streets. I've always said this in my career, now 28 plus years. The challenge hasn't been in finding the housing. The challenge is getting people to accept it. That's a very difficult piece in ending homelessness, is a lot of homeless people are simply get set in their ways and just sort of accepted this sort of lifestyle. And so that's the challenge.
So a few years ago, I mean, you've worked a lot of different places in the what we affectionately call now the homeless industrial complex, or Jeff and I like to call it the homeless advocacy cartel. You've worked a lot in that system. So can you briefly walk us through that? Because I know your last place was Gresham, City of Gresham.
Yep. And so you asked me how I got into this. So after my little brother got off the streets, I was inspired to kind of change my degree and says, I think I want to work with the homeless and work with people with addiction issues. And that's kind of, it just started there. Once I started working at the nonprofits, pretty quickly it was a rude awakening. Even then, this is again like late 90s.
Yeah.
There wasn't any real effort on solving the problem or focus on the permanent solution. It was more about keeping the people comfortable. And I was not as vocal as I should have been early on, because I like to think I just didn't know better and I was still learning. I was still in my early 20s and this was kind of new to me, and there was other people with a lot more experience.
You're just following directions.
Yeah, and so I just trusted my superiors and played the game. And I will tell people now that I was part of the problem because I didn't speak up, because I started to notice there was a problem and I didn't say anything out of fear of losing my job. And I'm embarrassed to say this now, but I'm also proud that that's not who I am anymore. Because I was new and I was poor and lived in a studio apartment. I was just barely getting by, making $11 an hour working at a men's homeless shelter. So I watched over time as what once was a cause, because back in the day it was a little bit better, what once was a cause has become this multi-billion-dollar industry. And I've worked at the county, the city, the state, nonprofit, for-profit, and faith-based. And so I've worked at the top 6 types of homeless services type programs, and so I have a strong understanding of the system. And for the most part, all of them are kind of part of the problem in different ways, right? And of course, another problem is all of them don't really communicate. So I do call this an industry because people are profiting, and this is the wrong way of looking at it. Our number one goal should be to work ourselves out of a job, right? I want to end homelessness tomorrow and then move on and do something else. And that's not the attitude of most of the people out there, because they don't focus on the permanent solutions. And I call them out on that.
And I want to just push on this issue. For me, like, I don't think it'll ever be ended. Like, I think it should be smaller than it is and not be a big industry. But people are always going to have different reasons in which they're homeless for a period of time, or a chapter, hopefully, or something they're going through, or a bad decision they've made, or just an unfortunate thing that's happened. But I mean, we should be able to uplift people out, right?
Well, yeah, and you make a good point. I usually just say end homelessness because it's faster. Yeah. But really what it is you have to reduce homelessness to a manageable level.
Yes.
And really, ultimately, all we can do really is to help anybody who wants off the streets. Anyone who doesn't, you have to go down a different road, usually enforcement, and it becomes more complicated. But bare minimum, it's completely unacceptable that anybody who wants off the streets today is not off the streets. That to me is inhumane, right? And that happens every day. People are being victimized out there every day who have a heck of a time trying to wade this complex system. we will never truly end homelessness, but we can get it down to a manageable level and not have to spend billions of dollars. That is 100%. And I'm actually confident. I'm feeling this shift lately. I'm sure you've noticed it, that common sense is returning, question the status quo seems to be okay again, and that with just a little more momentum and a little more support and a little bit maybe additional changes in leadership of certain electeds, we're going to get there.
Yeah.
And so I'm feeling very excited lately. I think I'm feeling hope for the first time in many years.
Kevin, you went from working at these different places. Your last employer was the city of Gresham, which just for background story, that's Multnomah County. So Gresham is part of Multnomah County, just like Portland.
Yes.
So the county commissioners right now in Multnomah County, people might know or might not know that we don't have any central database for where there's currently shelters.
Correct.
We don't have any database for like who we're helping and what services we're giving them where. So there's a lot of challenges. And so you kind of worked within that system that I think is very broken in Multnomah County.
It was challenging, but I want to say is I'm extremely proud of the work I did in Gresham. We did just miracle type work up there. And it started, in October 2018 was the day I wrote the mayor a letter, because I received a letter from him and all other citizens because I just bought a house up there. And what he wrote in this letter was there was nothing compassionate with allowing a person to live on the streets. And I was hit with a lightning bolt because I was like, oh my gosh, I couldn't believe there was a mayor with the courage to say that, because I've always thought it. And I was so inspired, I wrote him a letter. And I was blown away and said, I commend you, this is great, keep up the courage. But also I'd done my research and I learned about maybe certain things I would disagree with like, say, the people he had partnered with. And so I basically, in a very blunt way, because I had nothing to lose, because the fact is I wasn't looking for a job, was this is what's working and this is what's not with you guys. And so take or leave my advice. I just think you're on the right direction.
I think you're going the right direction here, and here's some things that are not going to serve you.
Yeah, and I've always been that way. And the most incredible thing happened. A week later, they said, would you like to come to City Hall? And I'm like, wow, City Hall, that's amazing. And so I went there and I met with some of the senior managers and we had a really good conversation. And then I kind of stayed in touch a few more days and they invited me back. And we talked again. And all we did for about 2 hours is just talking about the system and who I am. So I was just Kevin Dahlgren for a couple hours, like, we should do this and not this, not this. Not knowing that they were getting more and more interested in hiring me, and not because I already was working. And at the end of our second meeting, they offered me a job. And I was really excited and inspired, and I was like, absolutely. And the rest is history. And so I was hired a couple months later. That things take time. And over this 4-year period, we just did incredible work up there. And I was very lucky because even though we were under the Multnomah County umbrella, I was working for another city with, let's just say, a lot more common sense. I had a supportive mayor and supportive city council that really got what I was trying to do, and I convinced the right people, and that was helpful.
Let's go down to brass tack numbers, because we are seeing in Multnomah County, for example, right now, at Multnomah County, let's just call it Portland, Multnomah County, that as we are shoveling more money at this, over $1 billion in 5 years, the number's growing. In that same trajectory, talk to us about what you accomplished in Gresham.
Well, what I say my advantage is I didn't have access to the money, so it forced me to be creative because we didn't have this massive budget. It was pennies to the dollar of Portland, because Gresham has a lower tax rate and cities live or die by how many taxes you get, right? And so we had a very small budget and very few people. And so when you have no money, you're forced to be creative. But also I knew the very first step to ending this crisis was with the outreach. Something I had been very vocal about for a decade before I got hired in Gresham is that it's virtually non-existent in Portland, right? There are a few teams, but when you think about how many homeless there are, it's like they're talking to 2-3% of the homeless population, right? And I always knew that was step one. So the few days after I started, Mayor Bemis asked me, what's the plan, Kevin? And I remember responded quickly and saying, my plan is to work myself out of a job. And he really was shocked by that answer, but also like, that's freaking an awesome answer, because that was my attitude.
And you meant it.
My attitude was like, I am going to work myself out of a job, because that should be the attitude of anybody that works in homeless services. Yes, it's not realistic that it's going to end it completely, but you can work yourself to the point where it's manageable and move on to your next thing.
That you don't need a department that keeps growing and growing and
yes.
growing. Yeah.
So I started with the outreach. Within the first week, the first thing they said is avoid the Springwater corridor because that's sketchiest. And there was hundreds of campers out there with this 4.7 miles, which is the border of Portland and the border of Boring, Oregon. And it just kind of weaves through the woods.
And it was the first place you went, probably.
So of course it was the first place I went, even though I was sort of encouraged not to go there. And what I did over about a 10-month period is I had daily contact with everybody out there. And that's key, because daily contact serves two purposes. Three really is daily contact builds trust. Actually, it really starts with a rapport, trust, and then it brings back hope. But also, it deters negative behavior. So imagine like in certain areas where there's the homeless that want help, but there's the homeless that aren't really want help. Being out there every day and being present, it's going to deter certain behaviors if they know, wow, this is a city who kind of cares. This person won't leave us alone, right? And so I was very persistent, and I went there every day. I ended up walking exactly just over 1,100 miles on my year one in Gresham, just in the corridor. And so I was averaging 10 miles a day back and forth, 6 days a week. And it added up to 1,100 miles. And
were you fit?
I got fit by the end, and I have this great, in fact I should share it, there's this great before and after picture from the day I started and then exactly 1 year later, and I took it in my same vehicle, and I'm just like, my hair is much longer, I'm sunburned, I got like cuts on my face, and I'm just like, it's like I just got back from war, right? and I say this because I was admittedly assaulted out there a couple times. What was great about what happened in the corridor is I just kind of didn't talk about being out there. I sort of just kept it on the down low and just did the work. And certainly people started noticing a little bit of a change out there, but I also didn't want to talk about the dangers out there, or my fear was they would tell me not to be out there anymore, and I just couldn't accept that because I was out there to fix it. And that's where easily 80-90% of every homeless person in Gresham was the corridor. And so after we had restored the entire corridor, cleaned up 3 to 4 million pounds of trash, housed hundreds, right? Some people moved along because they weren't ready for help, and other people accepted help. It's important to note too, we did not have at that time a no camping ordinance, so we weren't kicking people out. We were simply being assertive with our outreach, saying it's time to accept help because this isn't working. So most accepted help, some did not. And that was really the start of everything. And so a couple months go by after everything was kind of restored, and I was kind of focused on other parts of Gresham, and this little lady one day decided to go to the corridor for the first time in like 10 years, right? And she had lived in Gresham for 20 plus years, not knowing the warnings of don't go to the corridor. And so she went out there on this beautiful summer day and just walked the entire thing and was like, wow, this is an amazing experience. This is phenomenal. She went home and she apparently, she either emailed the mayor or one of the senior managers, but I think it was the mayor. Sorry, it was the mayor. And she said something like, Dear Mayor Bemis, I was in the Springwater corridor today. It was beautiful. I just have one question. Where are all the homeless? And Mayor Bemis wasn't 100% sure and reached out to some of the senior managers to talk with me. And then I kind of talked to them about what I've been doing. And that's kind of when the local media got involved. I ended up getting on the front cover of multiple publications saying, how did you do this? And I said, it's the outreach. It's that daily contact. Something I've been screaming for years now. So to summarize, I'm just extraordinarily proud of the people I worked with in Gresham. I mean, these are very passionate people, and we did phenomenal work, and I will always be thankful for that.
And what were the numbers, Kevin? You went from a number where you guys had a count to another. Talk to me about the numbers.
Well, from the day I started, our numbers dramatically dropped every single year. At the height of COVID, no one did a point-in-time count, so we did our own point-in-time count. And even though that wasn't official, we felt like it was still the right thing to do. And we took it seriously. We wanted to know exactly how many homeless were there, which we knew already because one of the strict rules in our city was daily contact with every homeless person. Something I sort of suggested that like we have to have daily contact. And to the best of our ability, we had that daily contact. We went to the corridor every single day. We went to every park every single day. We went to every street corner every single day and just said, hello, 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 hello. And that made a huge difference. So that was a big part of our success, was that daily contact.
Yeah, it's been mentioned, Betsy Johnson calls it a navigator. Like it's almost like you have a navigator. You have somebody who's kind of like, hello, you know, this is the direction. This is, you know,
you need
believing
that
in people and talking with them and letting them know what's available.
So many homeless right now, as we sit, are desperate for guidance and desperate for help, and they're not getting it. It's easy to think this person is just some lazy bum getting high. Yes, we see that. But when you actually sit there and talk with them, you get to know them and learn their story, you realize, my God, they fell through the system. Even if they are responsible for their own situation, it's our responsibility to kind of guide them in a different direction, right? And that's not happening. Outreach is extremely rare. And
I talk to people all the time that have never met anybody.
Yeah, quick statistic is the couple hundred people I've interviewed the last year alone in just Portland, in every square corner of Portland, every district from, just every concentrated area of homelessness in all of Portland, over 90% have told me they have never been approached by an outreach worker. Never. Think about that. That's completely insane. That is not okay. That is the first step to ending this crisis.
Versus like, okay, well, rapid response is doing the cleanup, and now there might be a social worker there, and they're like, hey, do you want to go to shelter? You want to do whatever? And they're like, no, I'm good. I'm leaving. But if you have a regular conversation, you have rapport, you're talking with them about options, like they start seeing you as part of their, you know, their network and their family, if you will. And then it's like, okay, I can do this.
And that's another reason for the daily trust is there is a daily contact. There is a strong mistrust in the system. The homeless simply do not trust us for good reason. It takes time. Sometimes you get lucky on day one, they love you and they'll hug you. Other times it takes several weeks. It just depends, but you need to understand where the mistrust comes from, because they're like, who are you? Again, if 90% of homeless people have never had an outreach worker approach them, they're obviously going to treat you differently. They're going to be like, what's this person up to and why are they here? And I remember day one when I was in the Springwater corridor in Gresham, when I approached my first group of homeless people and I would talk to them for a half hour and I said, I'll see you tomorrow. Every single one of them started laughing because they thought it was a joke. And they're like, aha, okay, whatever. And then I came back day 2, day 3, day 4, day 5, and they're like, oh my God, right? And they really were shocked with the daily contact. They laughed at me because they've heard this so many times before, because back in the day, outreach was much more common. So 90s and even 2000s, you did see outreach teams. But all the newer homeless that have only been out there 5, 6, 7, 8 years, almost non-existent. And yes, there are outreach teams currently employed by the county, but there's very few, and where are they going? Not enough places, I know that for sure.
Yeah. You are, you're not liked by some people in your industry. Maybe you don't know that. I know, right?
Well,
I just want to talk about it really openly. Like, you make them so mad.
Well, you know, not as many as you would think. It's just like I care so deeply about this cause that we can reduce homelessness to a manageable level, and I have devoted my life to in a very, very passionate way to try to end this crisis, right?
Yeah.
And because I'm a truth teller, because I'm talking about the industry or no outreach, people get personally attacked. Well, you know what? I'm not actually attacking anybody. I'm discussing that we need to rethink our system, not the person. It's kind of like saying, don't hate the player, hate the game. I hate the game. We need to change the system. We change the system, we change the person. We just need to rethink where we're spending our money and how we're doing it and our approach. And honestly, yeah, there are some people that'll never agree with me, but they're generally the ones that are part of the problem, you know?
So you told me once, and I'm going to let you decide if you want to use a name of an organization, but you told me once about an organization that is based in Multnomah County whenever you were with Gresham, and they were charged, they were getting grant money with Multnomah County, and they were charged with doing some outreach, including Gresham. And you called and said, so where are you going to be in your outreach, and just so you could come up with a plan.
Well, and I'll say that this is a major nonprofit in Portland, and they do this to everybody. It's part of their policy and it's written into the grant to not share any information. And so when I met with them, and this is still frustrating to me to this day, I was like, nice to meet you. We're going to work together kind of indirectly. I do that, you do you, and I'll do me, but also we got to collaborate. And they said, well, we're never going to tell you where we're working. I said, all right, well, if I find a person needing your services, can I refer to you? They said, we don't take referrals. I said, all right, can I tell you where they are so you can go to them? They said, well, we're not going to do that. We'll find them. I said, but if I tell you where they are, that's going to make it faster. They're like, we're not going to do that. I said, all right, well, then how about what if then you at least let me know when and where you're working so we don't duplicate services? I'll do this area, you do this area. And they said, we're not going to do that. And basically they went down it's the strict who, what, when, where, and why, not to share with anybody. And this agency has done this for 25 years to everybody. And what's really frustrating is every year they oftentimes will then publicize the fact that they've housed all these people and question, well, who are these people, right? Because you also never see them out there. And so this is very...
You never see them out there. They never give real metrics on these people. Where are they? Where'd they go? What's their name?
And I'm okay with them hating me and not liking me because they are a big part of the problem. They have profited from this and they're not doing their job. We need to rethink how we're funding these nonprofits and demand metrics, demand measurable results. That is the only way to look at this, right? Like in if you're an industry, let's treat it like a business. And in a business, you have to thrive. And in homeless services, the way you thrive isn't in increasing homelessness, it's in decreasing homelessness. So I've always said, well, then why not pit two major nonprofits against each other and make it competitive to see who can house the most people the fastest? And then at the end of the year, give them the whoever wins more funding. Because we could, if we actually made this competitive and treated this like the humanitarian crisis it is, maybe we would solve it. But they're not. I've never seen them making any effort to actually end this crisis.
So I want to ask you about this word, if it were to be competitive in terms of put people in housing. How do you feel about the Housing First initiative?
Housing First is very flawed. The biggest reason is one of the main components of Housing First, because it's a philosophy. Housing First is a philosophy. Is one of the main components, and it's the key word, is personalized voluntary services, which means the idea behind Housing First is that if you house a person immediately, regardless of barriers, their basic needs are going to be met and that they're more likely to recover. And I would agree with that piece. I get it, meeting your basic needs. The problem with Housing First is because there's no agreement, contract, or even acknowledgement of change. They end up going into that Housing First model and then living there for life without changing any behaviors, because that happens because they still aren't giving the right support. And I've known clients who've either died day one on Housing First, or ones that have lived there for 20 plus years who are now completely recovered and working full time but still not paying rent, because once you go into Housing First, you stay for life usually. And so that's also not okay. That bed should go to someone who needs it more. And so that's my biggest issue with Housing First, is there should be some kind of agreement that the person that we are paying for to go into housing agrees to work on their recovery. And that recovery is different for everybody, but that should be the goal. And it's not, because the activists will say, well, how dare you expect anything from them? And I'm saying, how dare you not expect anything from them? I believe everyone can become self-sufficient if you give them enough support. or at least reach their fullest potential. And so
Yeah.
I push back on them and say, well, how dare you not think they can thrive? My little brother was living under a bush in Portland, Oregon with a meth addiction. I got him off the streets. He's completely recovered, makes a better living than me, has a child, is thriving, beautiful home, great job. This can happen to anybody. This is our number one goal, and it's not.
So some of the videos that you have been putting out have had millions and millions and millions of views, right? And they're just fascinating stories. So how do you get people to talk to you that openly?
Yeah, and I get this question a lot because I guess the best way to put it is it does start with the approach. I don't treat a homeless person like a homeless person. I treat them like an adult. And so when I approach them, they just happen to be homeless. I'm approaching them like I would approach my neighbor, like I'd approach you, like I'd approach a family member, right? And if I treat them as such, I'm also going to call them out on their stuff if they've crossed the line. So it's no different if you're being rude to me. I'm going to say, like, Angela, stop, right? I'm going to say the same thing to them. I do not tiptoe around them. I treat them with respect, and I treat them like adults. And the most incredible thing that happens is they respond favorably and be like, man, it's the first time I've felt this way in years. And they've told me stories for decades how when outreach workers do show up, they're terrified. They'll throw them a pair of socks from 20 feet away because they don't want to get near them because God forbid they might have an axe, right? Or they might get a disease. And so there's this overall fear of the homeless. And yeah, there's good reason to be scared of some of them, but someone has to be that person to go out there and do this. And so really it's all about the approach, is having the courage and showing respect. And the respect goes both ways. So I will show respect to them, but I expect respect back. And if they don't respect me back, I'm going to call them out on it. And they respond favorably. They never expect it because they're so used to people going clinical on them, like, oh, he's homeless, and whisper, whisper, whisper. And the homeless can smell clinical a mile away. And if you do that to them, you're dead to them, right? They hate that crap, right? And I have that clinical training, but guess what? I leave it at the front, I leave it at my car and just approach them and just treat them like a friend and ask them very blunt questions, which they never expect. So stop tiptoeing around the homeless and just treat them like adults. 99% of the time, they're going to let you sit with them and talk with them. It's really that easy.
Kevin, you currently are unemployed. You left City of Gresham on good terms. You left We Heart Seattle on good terms, and you've just been doing this. You're doing interviews, you're writing, you're going out and shooting these interviews, you're growing like wildfire. What's next for you?
Well, my number one goal in life, really, because this is a cause for me, is to help our community end this crisis. And I'm very big on the advocacy, and I've been working with all types of people, not always people that we necessarily agree, but what I'm finding is that we're finding common ground. And so I'm feeling like there's a lot of hope lately. And I have nothing but love in my heart of Gresham and We Heart Seattle, but I also made the decision that sometimes you have to like close the door to open a new door.
Yeah.
And I feel like it was the right decision.
You were spread
and so
thin.
and I'm very proud of that. And I will always be so thankful of the work I did with them, right? But it was time for me to move on and do something different, and I'm very, very happy with what I'm doing now. With just private funds, we had restored over 35 parks in We Heart Seattle. Private funds and volunteers, because we were very much big on civic engagement.
Yeah.
Because if you want to end this crisis, stop waiting for the government to do it, because it's probably not going to happen. Put on your boots, walk out there and do it yourself. Pick up the trash, get to know the homeless, vote differently if necessary, and be part of the change. This is a call to action. It is.
Excellent.
I say this because a shift is happening, and I'm feeling a lot of hope, and I'm very excited. It's been a very exciting year, but even this month alone, people are really listening, and it's an exciting time, because I feel like this is this movement, and that we are right this close to making this significant change, that if this happens, the rest of the United States is going to take notice, and this could just affect everywhere, the entire United States. Because I do feel like Portland's about a year ahead of most people, because there's a lot of other cities like San Francisco and San Diego that aren't really ready as much. But here we have some common sense city councilors. We have a couple common sense county commissioners. And I do feel like we're going in the right direction. So I'm very excited about that.
Great.
I've had such an incredible 2 months. I've done more in 2 months than I've done in a year. And really just like things are catching like wildfire and everyone's listening. We've been getting a lot of really positive attention. We sometimes focus on the haters. But honestly, I think the haters are by far the minimum. They're just, they have more time to hate, so it sounds like it's more. But there's a lot of people who are really excited and change is in the air, and I'm feeling it. And I'm very happy to be a part of that.
Me too. That's so cool. Is there anything else you think you want to say that we didn't talk about?
Well,
because we'll do this again.
Big kudos to PDX Real. Why we've gotten so close is because we're on the similar path. We believe in the same cause, and we're out here making a real difference. And the fact is, there's very few people like us doing this, and this is why we've gotten so close. So I thank you for asking them to follow me. You need to follow them because you're also doing incredible work, and I'm an obsessed fan.
I'm a big fan of yours too. We love each other.
I mean, sometimes at night I'm watching the phone. I literally am like, she's so good. I'm like, how does she do this? And I've like screamed it, right? Because I'm like, oh.
That's how I feel. Like I posted a video, of us on Monday, and it's just like people love them. People love your content. So
yeah. And I guess I'll just also say if it's in here is I want to work with everybody. I'm not one of those haters that says I'm just going to do it my way. I've always been open arms, and if I get the hate that's too much, I ignore them because it's counterproductive. But if I have someone contact me that says I disagree, Kevin, with everything you stand for, I'm like, whoa, that was mature. And it's so mature. I'm like, do you want to meet for coffee or gin? Because I'm so blown away. Now that rarely happens. But if someone actually said this to me, I'd probably want to meet him because I'm like, the fact that they're treating me that way was shocking because usually it's a lot more harsh.
Yeah.
And I am very much, the thing is they're just as passionate as I am, but in different ways. I want to understand them because the fact is they may slightly change my way on certain points. I'm not cocky enough to think that I know everything. If you would, rather than just focusing on the hate, if you could just talk with me in a calm, mature way, why you disagree with me on my stance on housing first, I'm going to listen. And I might change one small part of that piece and be like, you know what? I might change my messaging on that and be like, you know what? Housing first I don't agree with, but I talked to this person once and they said in this respect it actually works. And be like, you know what? I agree. I am open-minded. I don't know everything.
You can find Kevin on Twitter, Kevin V. Dahlgren. You can also find him on YouTube, Truth on the Streets.
And also I have a new .org, which is truthonthestreets.org.
Thank you, Kevin.
Thank you. Lovely to see you.
Hello, it's not just you. It's part 2. That's why we're in different clothes. Kevin and I are going to continue to talk. Kevin, when you started working for the city of Gresham, there were about 400 people that were homeless in Gresham. And within a year, 179 people were in shelter. And then whenever you left the city of Gresham, there were hovering around 10 people that were still homeless.
Which is still about the current number. I left Gresham about 2 months ago. It's still on average of 10 or 15. It's pretty darn low.
And how long were you there?
4.5 years.
So in 4.5 years, on average, I mean, there was 179 the first year, but it was almost as if 25%, I mean, that's how it averaged out. About 100 people.
And every year continued to drop till we got it to historic lows.
And where did they go?
High percentage went into housing, actually. As one thing we had heard the first year, specifically from Commissioner Stegman, was we're just kicking them out and sending them to Portland. And we heard this repeatedly, and we were frustrated, but we just decided to keep our heads down, keep our mouths shut, and just continue the work. Mm-hmm. And just figured, of course they think that, Stegman working in such an incompetent county couldn't believe there was actual positive results.
Yeah, Commissioner Stegman is East County's commissioner from Multnomah County.
And she did not like our success because it made Portland look bad. And this is why her and I pretty quickly on bumped heads. And we had to play nice, of course, because we're being funded by the county. So therefore, we just sort of smiled and respectfully said that's not happening and continued to do the work. And to answer your question, where they went is, I've always been a big believer with the outreach, is daily contact builds trust, builds rapport. And with this regular contact, the goal is to help a person prepare to leave the streets, which means making them self-sufficient, making them reach their fullest potential. You do this, we no longer really have to have the affordable housing conversation, or there's 1,000 homeless, so we need 1,000 housing units. That's not true. You make a person self-sufficient, we no longer have to have the affordable housing argument. So a lot of these individuals were more of the low-hanging fruit, not the chronics, the old dude with the beard screaming at you, pushing the cart, right? That person was going to take time. But what we had in Gresham was a lot of families and a lot of people were motivated and ready and just couldn't believe someone was out there every day talking to them. So we were able to place a lot of them pretty quickly in the housing because these are the people that were employable, wanted jobs, were being clean or wanted to get clean. And so really a good 30% were very, very motivated to leave the streets. No different than Portland. Mm-hmm. If we actually did a thorough assessment of everyone in Portland right now, and just doing our job and being out there, we would immediately, I would say within months, not years, we'd see a 30 to 40% reduction in homelessness just by working with people every day. Because there's I interview a lot of people in the middle of their addiction and mental illness and other stuff. These are the chronics. But there's also a lot of families out there, people living in cars, people with medical issues, people who got divorced from their wife or their husband. Just a lot of external type stressors. We help them with that. We can at least reduce homelessness by 30-40% extremely quickly, and then focus all our energy on the chronics. So that's kind of what we did in Gresham.
Kevin, I have heard from a lot of different people that Multnomah County are a bunch of bullies. That if they don't like what you're saying in lockstep, then they will, whether it's a different city or it's other people in bureaus, like they will be very harsh on people. And they also will pull funds or pull programs.
Or threaten to. Now, I will say I have not personally met JVP, but under Kafori, absolutely. Minus Sharon Myron. I'm close to her. We're friends. She is not a bully. She's actually very approachable and easy to work with. The other county commissioners historically have been bullies if you disagree with them ideologically. And this is something that had happened when I was at Gresham and made our job a lot harder. And, really within year one, after we've been so successful, I was getting a lot of, I was on the front cover of multiple papers, like Reclaiming the Springwater Corridor and Housing at Last and Who Is This Outreach, and everything's different and changing and positive and things feel safer. We had an 88% drop in police calls. And so we were getting a lot of positive press while Portland continued to get negative press.
And Portland did not like that.
And the reason why they didn't like it was,
Multnomah County.
Multnomah County didn't like it. Portland was more indifferent. Multnomah County didn't like it because guess what? Portland and Gresham, were under the Multnomah County umbrella. And to people who don't understand local politics, counties fund cities. That's how it works. And so we were receiving funds from the county in order to do our job. We just did it differently. But unfortunately, when you receive money, your hands are a little bit tied with the grants restrictions, and we had to sort of play the game a little bit and drink a little bit of the, let's say, Kool-Aid, which I'm not big on drinking Kool-Aid anyway. So I was like, you know what, I'm going to find a way to work with them, but doesn't mean I have to be like them. Because if we were like them, it's never going to be solved.
I'm going to ask you something that is perhaps a little bit scary to talk about. So you had a situation where you were called in at your office after you kind of spoke out at an event about what Gresham was doing. And somebody asked you, why does Multnomah County not have these results? And you shared with them what you thought.
Yep, early on, I was doing a lot of public speaking. I went to all the neighborhood associations. I talked to the libraries, anybody who would listen, and they really loved it. And and I like public speaking. It was great. And then on one fateful day at a neighborhood association meeting, unbeknownst to me, Commissioner Stegman was in the audience. And I was very passionate. I had a PowerPoint. We're just like, we're killing it. We're killing it. We're killing it. And I was very proud of that. Right?
Right, you should have been.
And you know me well enough. No, I'm not just someone that complains and talks crap about other people. I'm very much a solutions-based kind of person. Mm-hmm. I'm not the person that says Portland looks like you know what. I'm like, look, Portland does look like this, but this is how to solve it. I am a solutions-based person. So someone stood up and said, Kevin, thank you for being here. We've noticed a difference. This is amazing. By the way, can you help me understand the differences between Portland and Gresham? And I was sort of advised to always be mindful of those kind of questions, but I admittedly was in that sort of mood where I was tired of not talking about it, and I felt like, well, I'll just be factual. And I simply said, we're better at it than they are. We have a better approach, we have outreach, we're making a difference. And I did then point out the fact is I had reached out to Portland multiple times and said, we're onto something big in Gresham. I want to help you, educate you what we're doing, because let's work together. I never wanted this to be us against them, and they refused. They said, you do you, we'll do us. And so I actually reached out to sort of the homeless team that was in place. These were policy advisors in 18 and 19, and they were not interested at all. And so I was certainly at that moment moody, because I'm like, come on, we're killing it out here, we're doing great work. So I was brutally honest. And a few days later, hell rained down upon me, because my gosh, I criticized Portland, which means I criticized Stegman, which of course I didn't. Right?
Which means you criticized at that time Deborah Kafori.
I had a friendly work relationship with them, right? I have nothing personally against them, but they didn't like if that I was talking out, because people were then attacking her, saying, why aren't you doing what they're doing? And all of a sudden it became us against them, and that was never the plan.
So human resources, your boss, called you into a meeting.
Yeah, and I think they did so reluctantly, because I love Gresham and I love the mayor, and I work very well with the city council.
They say good things about you.
Yeah, they gave me an incredible opportunity, and I've always said the Gresham model should be a model that should be duplicated throughout the United States. I've always said this, right? Mm-hmm. Adopt this darn model.
Outreach.
And I was brought in, and what I really learned quickly was Multnomah County is unhappy with you, and you shook the bee's nest a little bit, and now we need to kind of reel you back in a little bit. And I was like, I'm sorry, but it needs to be said. And they, a lot of them actually completely agreed with me, but they just said, there are funders. Because there are funders, we kind of had to play nice. And so, more time went on, and I still was allowed to do a little more media here and there, and then finally I became outspoken again, and then finally...
But wait.
I'm jumping ahead too far.
You're bumping ahead. You were given a gag order, Kevin.
Correct. And I was put on a 2-year media freeze, which was frustrating for me, because I was so proud. And if you actually look back on those times, you'll see that we went from talking about this every day to just like, does Gresham even exist anymore? Like, we did not go there.
Right. So we talked about this in our first episode, but Kevin, you can find him. His first place he was Twitter, Kevin V. Dahlgren on Twitter. And so for 2 years, you started to do interviews, and then you didn't do anything for 2 years because you were asked to be quiet over this period of time.
Correct.
And that's why you seem like you shot out of a cannon suddenly with all the things that you're saying and doing.
And that was tough, because in those 2 years we did incredible work. Incredible. And it was slowly killing me every day that we weren't getting to talk about it, when we were actually saving lives and making a difference and reclaiming the city and helping the people in a real way. And so that was always really frustrating. But 100%, this was a Deborah Kafori, Lori Stegman thing. Really, Kafori as the chair, right? I'm just going to say it, has a history of being a bully. If you disagreed with her, she would do everything in her power to try to silence you. It wasn't just me, it was anybody that disagreed with her. I've been very critical of her because she was the one who also, from the earliest days, said Wapato will never be a shelter. She was just like adamant. Well, guess what? Alan Evans came out of nowhere and made it into one. And it was amazing and magic. And then I was hoping, like, okay, great. He did a Hail Mary and performed a miracle. Next thing you know, we had hundreds of beds. And then Deborah Kafori said, we're not going to refer anybody there. And
we're not going to fund it.
And what really killed me about that is, like, for that very first year Bybee was open, when we had no other places to send them, really real places, where this was like, anyone who's been there at the Bybee Lakes Hope Center, it's an absolutely incredible program.
I've been there many
Managed,
times.
well run, beautiful nature, birds chirping. They believe in empowerment. They help a person reach their fullest potential. It is an incredible place to go. And for her to criticize it, I couldn't understand. And so for the very first year, Kafori made a point to let all providers know, especially since she was funding them all, do not send people to Bybee. And guess what? They didn't. So beds remained open for a full year. Guess, if you can, who the number one referring person was in the entire Multnomah County that sent people to Bybee Lakes Hope Center year one. The one person, the one provider that sent more people than anybody else.
I think it might have been you.
Yes. I was the number one referring partner. And you know why? Because every day in Gresham I was doing it. And then every spare moment I had time off, I went to Portland I wasn't paid by anybody, and said, I can refer you to Bybee. I can refer you. I did everything I could to get as many people in there because I'm a strong supporter in it. Or I did all my research. It's like, go here, do this. Did you hear about Bybee? I was Bybee's biggest ally. I just screamed it because this was an amazing program. And I'm still frustrated to this day because despite all my efforts, they still, on a daily average, had 50, 60, 70 beds open every single night with a fully staffed program. And you know what? You know what I say to that with Deborah Kafori? People died. People languished and died because they didn't get the help they needed. Yeah. Why wasn't those beds filled immediately? You know why? It's because she took it personal. She took it personal that how dare a privately funded program that believes in empowerment other than enablement would open under my watch. And so she made it personal. And by making it personal, I say that, in some ways she has blood on her hands because she allowed, she basically, with her power, she abused her power and said no one is going to go to Bybee. And that kills me. So shame on her for that. It's no different than this is a very common practice, as you know, with nonprofits is, we don't refer to faith-based programs because we don't believe in the whole God thing, right? I'm like, well, who are you to judge this? Shouldn't the homeless person decide whether they want to go there, right? I know that your nonprofit might not be into historically, like, say, faith-based programs or privately funded, but that's not your decision. It's the decision of the person on the street.
And not to mention that the programs that work the best, like NA and AA, those fundamental things, they all reach around. We don't care who your deity is, but there's a higher power that you're working with. Yeah.
So when I do outreach, it's not like I'm holding onto some bias that says, well, I can't tell them about that because I don't like them personally. If these people have an opening, I'm going to tell them about it. But I'll also tell them they're not my favorite program. It's going to be a challenge, but this is what's available. I'm not going to not say it because the homeless don't know anything about resources. It's my responsibility. It's our responsibility to share with them all resources, not just the ones that we like more than others.
So Kafori's gone. We have a new chair, Jessica Vega Peterson, and we also have a new person that is over the Joint Office of Homeless Services. There's a lot of people that know Dan. His name's Dan Field. Yep. This is his 12th week.
Yep.
I want to read to you a quote that he said 12 weeks ago. To anyone in the community who is homeless or housing insecure, whether you're sleeping on a couch, living out of your car, or lying in a doorway, we see you, and we will see you at the center of everything we do. That is my pledge here today. Please hold me to it.
Okay. Well, he may see them, but they have not seen him.
Right.
And I say this because if I had his position, within 12 weeks, I guarantee you more than 50% of every single homeless person in Multnomah County would know who I was. Because that's step one. I would go to every major encampment and be like, I'm in charge of this now. What do you need? And that's not happening. And so what I say to Dan, and I haven't met him, I hope to, is that your probation period is over. Okay?
Your probation. Yeah, exactly.
And it's time to do the work. It's time to roll up the sleeves and work with everybody. And I have a lot of, colleagues that I have mad respect for in the community that work for great programs, and they've also have not yet met him. So my question is, who is he talking to? Because it's the boots on the ground people that are the ones that really know the truth out there. Yeah. Right? I have no doubt he's had countless county meetings that talk and talk and talk. Well, guess what, sir? We've been talking for years, and it's getting old. So I would like to say less talk, more action.
And also, I love everything you just said, Kevin. And also, if we're just talking with the people that we're giving grants to and we're having work with the homeless and they tell you everything one way. Also talking with people that are on the street and people that are out there that are faith-based or people like you, will give you a more full spectrum view of what's happening and what needs to be done. Because the trajectory that we're going, Multnomah County is going, is not working.
It's not. And so, what I say to that is, look, we tried it your way, it didn't work. Can't we just try something different? It's not personal.
It's not personal.
And they take it personal. It's as if we're attacking their character. No. We're nice people, we're good people, but we're frustrated and we're emotional because the ones out there on the streets see the people dying every day. So I am just asking these people to think differently about it and to think about a different approach. Sharon Myron said it perfectly when she said, we just don't have a plan. Let's come up with a plan. And the reason why Multnomah County historically been scared of a plan is because they're scared the plan won't work. But what I say to that is a bad leader isn't someone that makes bad decisions. A bad leader is someone who makes no decisions. And if you make no decisions, that means you never have to say I made the wrong decision. But that's not the way it is. Because if you make a bad decision, guess what? You learn from it, right? I make difficult decisions every day and they're not 100% right. Sometimes I'm like, oh man, I gotta, get better. But that's the challenge of working with complex people on a very dysfunctional system. It's very hard to make the right decision. But as long as you keep trying, it's gonna, you're gonna find the right way to doing it. So I asked the county, you need to just simply work with everybody and work with people who know what they're doing. Really, have those conversations with like the Bybee Lakes Hope Center that believes in empowering, because empowerment is something the homeless desperately want. 90%, I'm gonna say 80 to 90% of all the programs that are run in Portland, Oregon aren't big fans of empowerment. They're big fans on keeping a person comfortable on the streets. Well, that's killing them.
Or putting them in an apartment where they're psychotic and
where they're not prepared.
Abusing drugs still. Yeah, they're not prepared.
No, that's the housing first model. Very flawed model.
Yes.
We need to prepare a person for housing. And what I say to housing first is it doesn't solve the problem, it hides the problem. And not only does it hide the problem, it then foots the bill to the taxpayers for the rest of our, generations, really. Yeah. Not even our lives, but generations.
And we've built a permanent homeless advocacy cartel. It's basically its own profitable institution, right? We're not resolving the problem. And then we're pretending as if people are getting better in those situations. I think about the housing situation. People are going to die by the time they build out all these units.
Yeah, they're dying every day. Fentanyl is the worst thing I've ever seen in my life. I'm a drug and alcohol counselor, and it's terrifying. And why are we not treating this like the crisis, the epidemic it is? It is terrifying what I'm seeing out there every day. I've personally Narcan people at least a couple times a week. Every homeless person I say, I've been personally Narcaned dozens of times, and I Narcan people almost every day. It's the fentanyl epidemic is completely taken over, and a high percentage of the homeless are now actively using it. And that's not judgment against people that are using, because everyone's like, oh, Kevin, how dare you? I'm not shaming the addict. I'm shaming the fact that we are ignoring them and allowing them to languish and die. It's terrible what I'm seeing out there every day. And so it's true. Let's stop talking about a plan for another $100 million building 3 years down the road, right? Let's do something now. So I want to just go to sanctioned camping. Something Mayor Wheeler brought up, and oh, God forbid, it's called a concentration camp. Are you kidding me? Right? Sanctioned camping with 24-hour care, 24-hour wraparound services, security is the best possible, most compassionate thing we could do right now.
Well, and I want to say, though, about this sanctioned camping that I don't think that saying, oh, because now we're going to have it, and I don't think that's the end of it. Because the thing is that every time our governing gets involved in stuff and we don't hold this to account, things are out of control in Multnomah County and the city and the state, frankly.
Yes.
And from my perspective, I want to make sure that they are triaging people and figuring out what they need and not denying them the possibility to be, people that have purpose.
Yep.
Because there are people out there that are addicted to drugs that do not need to be taken care of for the rest of their life. They need a shot up and a hand up.
Yep. And I love that you said the word purpose. And that is really the ultimate goal, is give them a purpose. And when they find that purpose, it's magic. It's like right now I'm just getting goosebumps because I've witnessed that purpose hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of times, right? Is every homeless person has a purpose, they just don't know it. And we have to help them find it. And we're not doing it by loving them to death, by enabling them to the point of dependency, where they're now slowly languishing and dying, right? We need to empower them like Bybee Lakes Hope Center does, or other programs that just believe in helping a person reach their fullest potential. That is magic, and that is amazing. That's not what Housing First does. That's not what harm reduction does. Harm reduction keeps them on the streets and says, here's a new pipe, have a good day. And we love you because you use, right? Which, by the way, is it's a dick move to give a person. I don't know how else the way to say it is. You give a person with no lack of rational thought and critical thinking the ability to continue to use, when any normal human would be like, no, that is not okay. Stop doing that, right?
Right.
I mean, that's only way to describe it.
Is there anything else you want to talk about?
Well, shout out to you. I mean, you have really been this incredible truth teller the last year plus, and I'm just proud to know you. And, you're out there doing the work, right? More than really almost all other reporters, and I just admire the heck out of you for it. So I'm so happy to be here.
The feeling's mutual. Sometimes I feel like you're always out there. You have the best, cool interviews, and then, I'm in doing video editing and, going and getting people to testify at something. But, many hands make all light work. We all need to be after it. But
we both have different skill sets and different approaches. The fact is, if you did exactly what I did, then, like you do,
right.
You're good at what you do, I'm good at what I do.
Yeah, but to that point, because there's a lot of people that'll be watching this, and I think that it's like, what we want everybody to figure out, everybody's got a job to do right now in Portland, Oregon, in Multnomah County, and in the state of Oregon, right?
Absolutely.
I mean, we have got to got to get this accountable.
This is a call to action. Roll up your sleeves and do the work.
Yeah.
And so I'm asking Dan, come out in the community, work with everybody and talk with them and learn the right approach. I wanted to say that the reason why we've gotten away with this for so long, where more money goes towards the problem, yet the problem continues to grow, is because no one's ever in charge. That's the problem, is that no one at the city is in charge of the county. Nobody at the county is in charge of the nonprofit. Nobody in the nonprofit is in charge of the city. And that's the problem. Technically speaking, Dan Field has a lot of authority. You could put yourself in charge. You could say enough is enough is enough. This is working, this is not. And here's what I'm going to ask of you. Demand measurable results, metrics. Find the programs doing the job and fire the ones that are not. Period. Because this is a crisis. This is humans. This isn't just some widget. This is people we're dealing with. And if the nonprofits aren't getting the job done, cut the funding and support the ones that are. People like Bybee Lakes Hope Center.
Absolutely. That's Kevin Dahlgren. Thank you, Kevin.
Mm-hmm.